This is preparing for the ACT 2021-2022 English passage number 5. So the title of this is The Flow of Time. So based on the title, we're probably talking about time. Flow may mean how time moves, perhaps, but you always want to pay attention to the title. So, 900 years ago, Emperor Sheshong of China ordered the design and construction of a clock built to keep time more accurately than other clocks. So right here, we want to consider this phrase. Now, Emperor Sheshong of China is the noun. Now, the verb that comes after it is ordered, and you never want to separate the noun from the verb with a comma. So that means that leaving it as it is with this comma is not the right answer. But also, this is not the right answer. Letter D is not, because that also has a comma there. So the only question then between B and C is this extra comma right here. So 900 years ago, Emperor Sheshong of China ordered, or 900 years ago, Emperor Sheshong of China. The reason that it's letter C is that this whole phrase, Emperor Sheshong of China, is the subject. And by putting in this comma right here, that separates it. And so this of China part kind of sits off on its own, which we don't want. So 62 says, construction of a clock built to keep time more accurately than other clocks. So looking at 62, we can either keep it as is, to keep time more accurately than clocks had previously come before it, more accurate at keeping time correctly than any other clock of the time, or more accurate than any other. So if you notice, all of these are tending to say the same thing. And so when that happens, what we want to do is we always want to look to see which one says the idea in the most concise, in the shortest way. Because we're always going to go for concision, for being as few words as possible. And so all of these phrases have more accurately. So we got more accurately, this has more accurate, and this has more accurate. Then we also have other clocks. So we also have that mentioned. So letter G, it says clocks that had previously come before it. Keep time more correctly than other clocks of the time. There we go. Now letter J says any other. And that's because, well, the word clock has already been mentioned. So the fact that clocks are showing here, here, and here, it's a bit wordy. Furthermore, one of the reasons that F is not the answer is it uses the phrase built to. But we've already talked about the design and construction, which means that by using design and construction, this is redundant, so we don't need it. So definitely letter F. Letter G, clocks that had previously come before it. Again, too wordy, because we can say that with any other. And then we also say other clocks of the time. And also it says more accurate at keeping time correctly. Well, that's also just saying more accurate. So that's why letter J is the correct answer. Number 63, this would be no simple timepiece. And because Chinese dynasties continued to astrology, they relied on complicated clocks that not only kept time, but also helped track stars, planets, the sun, and the moon. So why is it letter B? Well, the reason is because what we want to do is we want to keep clear about what is the subject and what is the verb. And so we say this, we're talking about this clock. This would be no simple timepiece. But if we kept this, the rest of it as part of the sentence, then we introduce a new noun. Chinese dynasties continued. And so that's why we have letter B, is because it separates it, so that it's its own sentence, and then we have Chinese dynasties continue to astrology on its own. Separate noun, separate sentence. So here it says Chinese dynasties continued. Well, they continued, or they adhered, they linked, or they fixed. Now the idea is that they followed astrology. And when you follow something, that is, you adhere to it. You link yourself to it, you fix yourself to it, but the most common word we use is we adhere to a common system of thought or a system of belief. An eminent scientist and bureaucrat named Su Song led Sheshong's ambitious project. Now, the first way that these answers differ is this word right here, is the word eminent. Now, eminent, starting with an E, that deals with a person of renown, a person of fame, whereas imminent, with an I, you're talking about something, an event that is about to happen right now or very soon in the future. So letter B and letter C are not correct because that's the wrong eminent. So between leaving it like this or changing it to this, the difference is right here in this word. Either lead or led. Now lead is present tense and led is past tense. And so if we look back to the previous sentence and to the sentence that follows it, they're all in past tense. And so we always want to keep the tense the same. So we don't change it because we want this to be past tense like it is before and after. Number 66. Using his expertise in calendrical science, Su Song created a spectacular timepiece housed within an ornate 40-foot tall tower. It says, given that all the choices are accurate, which one best indicates that Su Song relied on engineering achievements from earlier times? So, key phrase there is earlier times. So, if we left it as is, doesn't mention anything about the past. It just says his expertise. But in letter G, it says centuries of Chinese clockmaking. Letter H says, while authoring his treatise on astronomical clockwork, but it doesn't mention anything about earlier times. Letter J, after first crafting a small-scale wooden model. Again, doesn't mention anything about earlier times. So that's why F, H, and J are incorrect. Su Song created a spectacular timepiece housed within an ornate 40-foot tall tower. All right. So we have housed within, secured between. Well, when it's between something, it's between two things, but it's only a 40-foot tall tower. That tower is singular, so you can't be between one thing. And then encased around. Well, if you're around something, all the way around, that might work. Or nestled among. Now, among is kind of the same as between, whereas you have multiple things around you. All right. So he created this timepiece housed within a 40-foot tall tower. And so it is encased around it, whereas the idea of the 40-foot tall tower says that it's so big that this item is within it. So I think that's why letter A is the correct answer. At the tower's top sat an armillary sphere, or a nest of metal rings representing celestial reference points such as the horizon and the sun's path, that rotated in sync with the Earth, enabling precise astronomical observations. Now, one thing to note is this right here, this sort of double dash. Now, English teachers call it an M dash. I just noticed that it's the double dash. And usually, these happen together. There's two of them, because these double dashes work like those double commas, where you can take a phrase and you can take out that phrase in between and the sentence still functions. So that's why the answer is letter G, because this whole phrase right here that I'm underlining can be taken out and the sentence still works. At the tower's top sat an armillary sphere that rotated in sync with the Earth, enabling precise astronomical observations. And so, in order for this to work, it has to start and end with the same thing. They both have to start and end with either a comma or a double dash. Now, since it ends with a double dash, and we can't change that, then we only have one option. It has to start with that double dash. All right. So next, it says, besides, below the star sphere, the tower's open sides exposed a detailed model of a 5-story pagoda. Now we have this sentence starting with the word besides. So we have all the information we've talked about so far with this clock, and then besides, below the star sphere. Now this is confusing because we have besides and below. And these two are kind of at odds with each other because beside is right next to, but below is underneath. And these two kind of, they kind of don't work together. Now, next one is sooner or later. Now this one is about time in terms of when things were made. But we don't really talk about that. What we're doing here is we're talking about all the features that this timepiece has. And so we're kind of listing them out. So therefore, the answer is letter C, because this is the final detail that's being described here. Automated figurines would appear in the pagoda's doorway and ring bells to announce hours, sunsets, seasons, and other chronological events. So number 70, which of the following alternatives would not be acceptable? So here, now we're not saying which is the right one, we're saying which of these is the wrong one. And the answer is letter G, because what we want to do is we want to say automated figurines would appear in the pagodas and ring bells. But then it says they announced. Now what that does is that would be introduce some ambiguity because we've already got a verb. Automated figurines would appear. And then to bring in another active verb, they announced. The other three verbs are passive. We don't want two active verbs in the same sentence. And so that's why letter G is not correct. Number 71, the clock's inner workings were equally remarkable. So our options are revealed themselves to be, was shown to be, has proved. Again, they're all kind of the same idea, and when they're the same idea, we want the shortest one possible, which is were. Hidden in the tower, a water wheel 11 feet in diameter powered the entire clock. Therefore, water would pour at a constant rate onto one of the wheel's 36 buckets. So here we have therefore, in other words, and for example. So this is a transition word. So when we have a transition word or a transition phrase, we want to consider the sentence that comes before it and the part of the sentence that comes after it. Now, therefore means this in red causes this in blue. So, a water wheel powers the clock, therefore water would pour at a constant rate. Well, okay, yeah. In other words, that would be saying like the red and the blue were saying the exact same thing. Well, they're not. Next one is for example. Red would be, if we're saying for example, that means red would be saying something very generic, and then blue would be saying something specific, which isn't it either. Okay. Now, this sentence in red doesn't talk anything about a constant rate or about the buckets. So therefore, it doesn't seem to work. Rather, we can just say water. Hidden in the tower, a water wheel powered the entire clock. Water would pour at a constant rate into one of the 36 buckets. Again, short and sweet and to the point, usually the better answer. Then a stop mechanism halted the wheel and positioned the next bucket for filling. Chinese clockmakers had long used water wheels, but Susong's stop mechanism, which regulated the inertia, represented a significant innovation. All right. So we have nevertheless and regardless. So regardless is what you use when you say, all right, you're going to ignore warnings or bad things that are going to happen. Nevertheless is something happened despite what happened before it. So if we think about this, Chinese clockmakers had long used water wheels. Whoops. There we go. And then after it, Susong's stop mechanism represented a significant innovation. So water wheels have been used. Susong just made it better. So there's no talk about what happened before or some bad consequence. So what about if we removed the underlined portion? Chinese clockmakers and long used water wheels. Susong's stop mechanism represented significant innovation. The problem here is that we have a noun and a verb, and then we have a new noun and a verb, and we need a conjunction. We need something to connect them. So that's why letter D doesn't work. So we continue. Unfortunately, after Susong's clock ran for 30 years, invaders stole it. Later, the clock vanished altogether. It would be a few hundred years until the refinement of mechanical clocks in Europe, other clocks approached the complexity of Susong's masterpiece. All right, so it's 74. So the answer is, well, until with the refinement of mechanical clocks in Europe, other clocks would appear. So it seems like other clocks is the subject. So all of this is a phrase leading up to it. And so with the refinement of mechanical clocks in Europe, this whole phrase right here sounds like a phrase that can sort of be taken out. It would be a few hundred years until other clocks approach the complexity of Susong's masterpiece. So we want to be able to take this phrase and say, yeah, it provides good detail, but we want to say if we need to take it out, we can. And that's what letter G does, because notice the double dash. It starts and ends the same way, meaning it's extra information, but if we could take it out, the sentence still stands. And then finally, 75. Other clocks approach the complexity of Susong's masterpiece. So here they talk about complexity, approaching, coming within reach of, but all of them are all longer and sort of not as precise. Because we have the word complexity. Here we have complexity, high degree. This one, letter D, doesn't even mention complexity. Now, letter C is such a high degree, but we really are talking about a complex clock. And so a high degree, that's usually when we talk about a skill. And within reach of his masterpiece, usually when we talk about within reach, we're talking about a skill and less of a contraption, less of a device. And so comparing this to this, approached, eventually be able to draw anywhere near to, all of that in blue here can be expressed by this here, but we always want to pick the shorter of the answers. So that's why the answer is 75. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out all the videos on the playlist.